Good morning, everyone. I'm Joe Hayes, Chairperson of the National Council for Special Education, and I want to warmly welcome you to our annual research conference. In particular, I want to welcome our Minister for Special Education and Inclusion, Josepha Madigan, the first government minister with specific responsibility for these key policy pillars, and someone who, from her appointment in July 2020, has led the way in strengthening Ireland's educational horizon for the students with special educational needs. Minister Madigan will formally open today's conference, but before handing the floor over to her, I need to touch very briefly on a few important points. First off, it is with much regret that we are bringing this conference to you online for a second year in a row. The precarious situation with regards to COVID-19 prevails and sadly intensifies. We have been monitoring the public health space very closely. Given the present delicate and deteriorating situation, we felt that resorting to an online event was the only safe and prudent thing to do. Unfortunately, because of that, you won't have the usual networking opportunities, but we trust that you will nonetheless still find the day engaging and worthwhile. Certainly this morning's theme couldn't be more topical: continuity of education and dealing with regression post-pandemic. Last year we brought you presentations that captured the international scene on how education systems responded to COVID-19 and the school closures. This year we wanted to look at the impact of these closures 1 year on, and to explore how schools, in supporting the return to classrooms and managing the learning loss and impact on well-being, how they're coping and dealing with that. I'm looking forward to hearing Dr. Verena Letzel from the University of Trier. She will tell us how several European countries and other jurisdictions responded to school closures, and will then outline what the educational systems in these countries are doing now, 1 year on from the homeschooling situation. Professor Bram Norwich from the University of Exeter will discuss the impact of the pandemic on school learning and mental health, and will reflect on what lessons might be learned from the pandemic. It's always, of course, of particular interest to hear how local Irish schools have managed during this difficult time. With that in mind, we will hear from 4 schools across Ireland on the methods and practices that have worked well for them in dealing with regression and managing continuity of education. We have Niamh Corrigan, Aisling Fay, Claire O'Neill and Fiona Temple from Limerick, Donegal and Dublin, and they will lead a panel discussion just before we break for lunch. In the afternoon, we turn to a different theme and look at educational provision in settings after school. Terry McAdam and Dr. Rachel Ilder of RSM Ireland will present the findings from an NCSE commissioned review of educational provision in adult day services. The RSM team developed a unique good practice framework documenting expected standards in adult day services that provide education and lifelong learning for people with disabilities. We will hear about provision generally in this area and see how services in Ireland measure up to the principles of good education. The day will finish with a presentation from Roisin Doherty of Solace on the further education and training opportunities for school leavers and adults with disabilities. This is an area that there is a lot of anecdotal evidence, but not a great deal of actual, factually gathered information. And we know, for example, that the level of awareness of the options and pathways in this area is low. So Roisin's presentation will provide an interesting overview. Despite the constraints of this online setting, ladies and gentlemen, it is our earnest hope that each of you will find something useful and interesting in this day of reflection and insight. I now call on our Minister to address you. Minister.